The moment his hand landed across my face, time slowed. The conference room fell into eerie silence, but the cameras kept rolling. What none of them knew was that I wasn't just a junior accountant with a pretty resume. I was about to become their reckoning. 11 witnesses sat frozen in their leather chairs, their cowardice etched into every frame of that security footage. In 32 minutes, their worst nightmare would walk through that door, and the empire they built on silence would begin to crumble. My name is Amelia Bright, and until that Tuesday morning, I was invisible by design. 29 years old, junior financial analyst at Virexon Holdings, one of Denver's most prestigious energy conglomerates. The kind of employee who arrived early, stayed late, and never challenged the status quo. At least, that's what they believed. The quarterly review meeting had started like every other. 12 of us seated around the polished mahogany table in Conference Room A, 20th floor. With its panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains, Grant Sawyer, our Vice President of Operations, was presenting the Q3 profit projections with his usual theatrical flair. His Armani suit caught the morning light as he gestured at the screens, his voice booming with manufactured confidence. As you can see, we're projecting a 17% increase in net margins, he announced, clicking through his slides with the remote like a conductor's baton. I'd reviewed those numbers the night before. They were wrong, not just slightly off, catastrophically fabricated. The actual data showed a 4% decline, masked by creative accounting that would make Enron blush. I'd triple-checked, cross-referenced with source documents, even ran it past my own calculations 3 times. The discrepancy wasn't an error, it was fraud. "Excuse me, Mr. Sawyer," I heard myself say, my voice cutting through his monologue. "There's an issue with slide 14. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Grant's jaw tightened, but his smile remained plastered on his face. "I'm sure whatever concerns you have can wait until after the presentation. Miss Bright. Actually, it can't." I stood up, my hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. The revenue calculations are off by approximately $21 million. The subsidiary earnings from the Midwest division have been counted twice, and the operational costs have been understated by 30%. His face transformed from red to purple in seconds. "You're mistaken. I have the source documents right here." I opened my laptop, pulling up the real numbers. The actual profit margin is negative 4%, not positive 17%. That's when it happened. Grant crossed the room in 3 strides. I saw his hand rising, saw the rage contorting his features, but I didn't move. I wanted them all to see. The crack of his palm against my cheek echoed off the glass walls. My head snapped to the side, copper taste flooding my mouth where my teeth cut into my cheek. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret Chen from HR sat 3 feet away. She stared at her notepad. James Morrison, our chief accounting officer, suddenly found his phone fascinating. Director of Legal Affairs, Patricia Hoffman, actually turned her chair slightly away. 11 witnesses, including 2 department heads and a member of the C-suite, and not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. I straightened slowly, my cheek burning, feeling the heat spread across my face where his handprint was surely blooming red. I didn't touch it, didn't cry, didn't scream. I simply looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their cowardice, then began packing my laptop with deliberate calm. "This meeting isn't over," Grant snarled, his breathing heavy. "Yes," I said quietly, closing my bag. "It is." I walked to the door with measured steps, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind me, I heard Grant bark. "Where do you think you're going?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. In the elevator, alone at last. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized 18 months ago. It rang twice. "Clara Monroe." "Clara," I said, watching the floor numbers descend. "Activate phase 1. "He hit you?" Her voice was sharp, professional. In front of 11 witnesses. Conference room A, The cameras were rolling. How long ago? 3 minutes. I'll be there in 30. Don't wash your face, don't take anything for the pain, and don't speak to anyone from the company. Already ahead of you. Amelia? Clara's voice softened slightly. You did good, 18 months of patience, and he just handed us everything on a silver platter. I ended the call as the elevator reached the lobby. Security guard Tom gave me his usual wave, then did a double take when he saw my face. I didn't stop to explain. Outside, Denver's October air bit at my swollen cheek. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the gleaming tower of Virexine Holdings, at the 20th floor where 11 cowards were probably convincing themselves they'd seen nothing, heard nothing, and certainly wouldn't say anything. They had no idea what they'd just witnessed. Not a moment of weakness, but the beginning of their end. Grant Sawyer thought he'd put me in my place with that slap. In reality, he'd just signed his own death warrant, and I was about to be his executioner. People always underestimated me. It was my superpower, really. The quiet girl with the accounting degree, the one who smiled politely at office parties and never spoke up in meetings. What they didn't know was that before Virexine, before the pencil skirts and spreadsheets, I'd spent 3 years as a legal assistant at the federal prosecutor's office in Washington, D.C. I'd worked under Deputy Prosecutor Marcus Webb, handling white-collar crime cases that made headlines. I'd learned how predators in suits operated, how they built their kingdoms on fear and silence, and most importantly, how to dismantle them piece by piece. When I left to pursue private sector opportunities, Marcus had given me one piece of advice. Sometimes, Amelia, to catch a monster, you have to let it think you're prey. So I became prey. I applied to Virexine Holdings specifically because of Grant Sawyer. His reputation preceded him, a LinkedIn post here, a Glassdoor review there, former employees who suddenly went silent after leaving. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew how to look, but I didn't come alone. Clara Monroe wasn't just a contact, she was a force of nature. Former special agent with the Federal Bureau of Labor Safety. She'd spent 15 years investigating workplace violations that everyone else was too scared to touch. When she left to start her private investigation firm, Monroe and Associates, she specialized in one thing: taking down corporate predators who thought they were untouchable. We'd met during the Brennan Industries case, where her investigation had provided crucial evidence for our prosecution. When I told her about my plan for Virexine, she didn't hesitate. 18 months, she'd said over coffee in a downtown Denver cafe. That's how long we'll need to build an airtight case. You go in clean, document everything, and wait for him to make a mistake. 18 months of recording conversations on my phone. 18 months of blind CCing my personal email on suspicious financial reports. 18 months of screenshots, saved voicemails, and meticulously documented incidents. I'd watched Grant terrorize junior staff, particularly women. I'd seen him alter reports, threaten whistleblowers, and operate with the kind of impunity that comes from knowing everyone above you is either complicit or afraid. My apartment in Capitol Hill had essentially become a second office. One bedroom was converted into what I called the war room. Boxes of printed emails, USB drives with backed up data, timelines mapped out on the walls like something from a detective movie. My laptop contained encrypted folders with enough evidence to bury Grant Sawyer and half of Virexine's leadership team. The financial fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Through careful observation and strategic relationship building with IT staff, I'd discovered Grant's deleted email folder, a digital graveyard of incrimination. Lucas Varnes from IT, a brilliant kid who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times, had helped me understand the company's backup system. Every email Grant thought he'd deleted still existed on backup servers, waiting to be subpoenaed. Then there were the women, Sarah Martinez, who'd left abruptly after 6 months, Jennifer Wu, whose resignation letter cited personal reasons but whose exit interview had been mysteriously deleted from HR files, Rebecca Thompson, who'd signed an NDA in exchange for 2 months' severance after filing a complaint that never saw the light of day. I'd found them all, one by one, through LinkedIn and careful social media searching. Clara had made contact, and slowly, carefully, they'd begun to trust us with their stories. The sexual harassment was systematic. Grant had a pattern: hire young, ambitious women, isolate them, make increasingly inappropriate demands, then destroy them professionally if they refused. The NDAs were his shield, HR was his sword, and the culture of silence at Virexon was his armor. But I'd also discovered something else, something that would make this more than just a workplace violation case. Grant had been manipulating earnings reports to inflate his department's performance, which directly affected his bonuses and stock options. We're talking about securities fraud, the kind that gets the SEC involved. Every falsified report, every manipulated number, every doctored projection. I had copies of them all, along with the real data that proved the deception. Clara had connected me with former FBI forensic accountant David Kim, who'd reviewed my findings off the books. "This isn't just fraud," he'd said, eyes wide as he scrolled through the evidence. "This is organized corporate crime. With the right prosecutor, this could trigger a RICO investigation." The slap hadn't been part of the plan. We'd expected Grant to eventually fire me once I started pushing back on his numbers, giving us a wrongful termination suit to open the door for discovery. But physical assault? In front of witnesses? With cameras recording? He'd just handed us a gift wrapped in federal crime statutes. As I sat in my apartment that afternoon, ice pack against my cheek, I pulled out the burner phone Clara had given me, one by one. I sent pre-written messages to the network we'd built, former employees, current staff members who'd been too scared to speak up, journalists who'd been following Virexon's suspicious patterns. The message was simple. It's time. Grant Sawyer thought he'd silenced me with that slap. In reality, he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade I'd been assembling for 18 months. And in approximately 15 minutes, Clara Monroe would walk into that building with a briefcase full of federal authority and begin the countdown to his destruction. 32 minutes. That's all it took for their perfect corporate world to begin cracking at the foundations. I watched from the coffee shop across the street as Clara Monroe's black SUV pulled up to Virexon's main entrance. She emerged with two companions, both in dark suits, carrying federal badges and the kind of authority that makes security guards step aside without asking questions. Clara herself looked like vengeance personified. Navy power suit, steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that could freeze hellfire. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom. The security guard. 3 feds just went up to 20. What's happening? I didn't reply. He'd know soon enough. From my position, I could see the 20th floor. The conference room blinds were still open. I imagined Grant in there, probably spinning the incident already, turning himself into the victim of an hysterical employee who couldn't handle criticism. That's always how it went. But not this time. Clara later told me exactly how it unfolded. She walked into conference room A without knocking. Grant was mid-sentence, addressing the same 11 people who'd watched him assault me. "And obviously we'll need to begin termination proceedings immediately for Miss Bright's insubordination." "That would be inadvisable," Clara announced, placing her briefcase on the table with deliberate force. Clara Monroe, licensed investigator and federal liaison for the Bureau of Labor Safety. These are Special Agents Daniels and Reeves from the Civil Rights Division. Grant's face went pale. "This is a private meeting. You can't just..." "Actually, we can." Agent Daniels, a tall black woman with an intimidating presence, held up a paper. "Preliminary investigation order, signed by Federal Judge Harrison 40 minutes ago. We're investigating a reported incident of workplace violence with aggravating factors." "That's ridiculous." Margaret from HR stammered. "There was no violence, just a disagreement." Clara smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Interesting. Because we have multiple reports that Vice President Sawyer physically assaulted an employee in this very room less than an hour ago. A room equipped with..." She looked up pointedly. 3 security cameras. "Those cameras don't record audio," Grant said quickly. Too quickly. "No." Agent Reeves agreed, speaking for the first time. "But they do capture high-definition video at 60 frames per second. Every micro expression, every movement, every impact. He turned to the others. And of course, there are 11 witnesses. I assume you'll all be providing statements? The silence was deafening. People who'd been so confident in their positions suddenly looked like trapped animals. The cameras were malfunctioning. Patricia Hoffman from legal tried technical issues this morning. Clara pulled out her phone and showed something on the screen. Strange, because IT confirms the system has been operating normally all day. In fact, they've already created a backup of this morning's footage at our request. She looked directly at Grant. Would you like to see the timestamp, 10:47 a.m.? That's when the assault occurred, correct? James Morrison, the chief accounting officer, cleared his throat. I think there may have been a misunderstanding about what happened. No misunderstanding, Clara interrupted. We have the victim's statement, photographic evidence of injuries, and soon we'll have the video. But here's where it gets interesting. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. This isn't just about one incident. We're opening a comprehensive investigation into systematic workplace violations at Virexon Holdings. You can't do that based on one complaint, Grant snarled, his composure cracking. You're right, one complaint wouldn't be enough. Clara spread out papers across the table. But 17 complaints over 3 years, that's a pattern. And when those complaints include sexual harassment, assault, wrongful termination, and whistleblower retaliation, that's a federal case. The room erupted. Margaret from HR went white as a sheet. Patricia started furiously typing on her phone, probably alerting the legal team. Others began whispering frantically. Furthermore, Agent Daniels announced over the chaos. We're issuing an immediate preservation order. All emails, documents, personnel files, and digital communications related to Mr. Sawyer and his department are to be frozen immediately. Any attempt to delete, modify, or destroy evidence will be considered obstruction of justice. This is insane, Grant shouted, slamming his fist on the table. You can't just walk in here and… Mr. Sawyer? Agent Reeves interrupted calmly. I'd advise you to control your temper. We've already documented one assault today. Would you like to add threatening federal officers to your list of charges? Clara stood up, gathering her papers with theatrical precision. Oh, and one more thing. Miss Bright's suspension or any form of retaliation against her will be considered witness tampering. She remains a full employee with full access to her work materials, effective immediately. She can't come back here, Grant protested. After what, Clara challenged. Correctly identified financial discrepancies, performed her fiduciary duty to report potential fraud, got assaulted for doing her job. She turned to address the room. Each of you witnessed a violent crime today and chose silence. That makes you potential accomplices. I suggest you think very carefully about your next moves. As they prepared to leave, Agent Daniels addressed the room one final time. We'll be conducting individual interviews with each of you. I'd strongly recommend obtaining personal legal counsel. Company lawyers, she looked pointedly at Patricia, won't be able to represent you in criminal proceedings. The last thing Clara said before leaving was directed at Grant. Mr. Sawyer, you have 48 hours to provide all requested documentation. I'd also suggest you avoid any contact with Miss Bright. There's a protective order being processed as we speak. From my vantage point in the coffee shop, I saw them emerge from the building 20 minutes later. Clara looked up at the 20th floor and gave a subtle nod. I knew she could see me in the window. My phone immediately started buzzing with texts from coworkers. The ones who'd been too scared to speak before were suddenly very interested in sharing what they'd witnessed. The narrative was already shifting. Grant's armor of fear was cracking, and everyone could smell blood in the water. But this was just the beginning. The real destruction would come when we unleashed 18 months of evidence. Grant Sawyer didn't just slap me, he'd slapped the detonator on his own downfall. The floodgates opened within hours. That evening, I sat in Clara's downtown office, a sleek space on the 15th floor of the Meridian building, all glass walls and legal books. My face had bloomed into a spectacular bruise, documented by their forensic photographer from 17 different angles. Clara had insisted on it. Juries remember visuals, she'd said. Ready to see what 18 months of patience bought us? I asked, pulling out 3 external hard drives from my bag. Clara's team had assembled David Kim, the forensic accountant, Marcus Webb, my old boss who'd flown in from D.C., and Rachel Porter, a data recovery specialist who looked like she could hack the Pentagon from her smartphone. Jesus Christ, David whispered as he scrolled through the financial documents. This isn't just fraud, it's systematic. Look at these patterns. He's been inflating departmental revenues by an average of 30% every quarter for 3 years. It gets worse, I said, pulling up another folder. These are the real earnings reports, before Grant's modifications. Virexen has been operating at a loss for 6 quarters. They've been using investor funds to pay dividends, creating the illusion of profitability. Marcus leaned forward. That's securities fraud. The SEC will have a field day with this. But the financial crimes were just one layer. Rachel had been working on the email recoveries, and what she found made everyone in the room go silent. He's got a whole system, she said, projecting emails onto the wall screen. Look at this. Instructions to HR on how to manage problem employees. And by manage, he means destroy. The email thread was damning. Grant explicitly instructing Margaret from HR to fabricate performance issues for a woman named Diana Foster, who'd rejected his advances. Another directing the creation of a hostile work environment for Marcus Thompson after he'd questioned Grant's numbers in a meeting. There were dozens of these, each one a federal violation. Here's the smoking gun, Clara announced, holding up her phone. Jennifer Wu just agreed to break her NDA. She's willing to testify. Jennifer Wu, I'd never met her. But I'd seen her ghost haunting Grant's deleted emails. 26 years old, Harvard MBA, hired as a senior analyst. She'd lasted 4 months before signing an NDA and disappearing. Now we'd know why. Clara put her on speaker. Jennifer's voice was steady but carried years of suppressed rage. He started small. Comments about my appearance, suggestions that I'd advance faster if I was friendlier. When I reported it to HR, Margaret told me I was being too sensitive. Then came the lunch meetings that weren't about work, the hand on my lower back, the hotel room key at the Denver conference. What happened when you refused? Clara asked gently. He destroyed me. Suddenly, my reports were substandard, my analysis was questioned, my access to key projects was revoked. He told other departments I was unstable, emotional. When I tried to transfer, he blocked it. When I went to HR again, they offered me a choice. Sign an NDA and leave with 2 months severance, or be fired for incompetence with no reference. Jennifer, would you be willing to testify to this under oath? Yes, but I'm not the only one. I know of at least 6 other women. We've been talking. After the call, the room was electric with possibility. Marcus was already on the phone with contacts at the Department of Justice. David was preparing a report for the SEC. Rachel continued mining data, each discovery worse than the last. Look at this, Rachel said, pulling up another email chain. Grant's been taking kickbacks from vendors. He's approving inflated invoices in exchange for personal payments. There's over $2 million in bribes here. I opened my laptop and accessed a folder I'd been saving for the right moment. Remember how I mentioned Grant's worst nightmare? This is it. On screen was a recorded Zoom call from 6 months ago. Grant didn't know that Zoom's auto-record feature had been enabled by IT as part of a company-wide policy. In the video, he was explicitly discussing with 2 other executives how to manipulate stock prices before the quarterly earnings call. Short your positions before we announce the real numbers, Grant was saying in the recording. Then buy back after the dip. We'll make the losses look like a market correction. That's insider trading, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's criminal conspiracy. That's prison time. Clara stood up, energy crackling around her. How many of these recordings do you have? 43. All auto-recorded by the system. Grant never knew. This changes everything, Clara said. This isn't just a workplace violation anymore. This is organized crime. RICO statutes could apply. The entire executive team could be implicated. As we strategized late into the night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it carefully. Miss Bright, this is Lucas Varnes from IT. I still have the backup drives from before the last server purge. Everything Grant thought was deleted. Meet me tomorrow. I showed the message to Clara. She smiled, the kind of smile that prosecutors get when they know they've already won. Grant has no idea what's coming, she said. He thinks this is about a slap. He's about to learn it's about an empire built on crimes, and we're holding the wrecking ball. Outside, Denver's skyline glittered in the darkness. Somewhere in this city, Grant Sawyer was probably drinking expensive scotch, calling in favors, thinking he could make this go away like he'd made everything else disappear. He was wrong. Tomorrow, Lucas would deliver the final nails for his coffin. The other women would come forward. The feds would expand their investigation, and every crime Grant thought he'd buried would rise from the digital grave to drag him down. The slap had been his fatal error. But the real poetry was that his destruction wouldn't come from that moment of violence. It would come from years of careful crimes he thought no one was watching. I touched my bruised cheek and smiled. The pain was worth it. Every second of those 18 months had been worth it for what was coming next. The retaliation was as swift as it was predictable. I arrived at Virexon at 8 a.m. the next morning, my face a canvas of purple and yellow bruises that makeup couldn't quite hide. The security desk had a new addition, 2 guards instead of 1. And neither was Tom. Miss Bright, the unfamiliar guard said, not meeting my eyes. I need you to surrender your access badge. On whose authority? Human Resources. You're on administrative leave pending investigation? I smiled and pulled out my phone, dialing Clara's number on speaker. Clara, they're blocking my entrance to Virexon. Security says I'm on administrative leave. Clara's voice filled the lobby, clear and authoritative. Gentlemen, I'm Clara Monroe, federal investigator. Any attempt to prevent Miss Bright from accessing her workplace is a violation of the protective order filed yesterday. She has full employee rights pending our investigation. Would you like me to have Agents Daniels and Reeves explain this in person? The guards exchanged nervous glances. One made a hurried phone call. 5 minutes later, Margaret from HR appeared, looking haggard. She'd aged years overnight. Amelia, she said stiffly. There's been a misunderstanding. However, we've relocated your workspace. You'll be in the basement archives. The basement, no windows, no witnesses, no colleagues. Classic isolation tactics. Perfect, I said cheerfully. I love what you've done with the retaliation. Very textbook. Clara will be thrilled to add this to the file. Margaret's jaw tightened. It's for your safety. Of course it is. The basement office was a storage closet with a desk older than I was, a computer from 2015, and a fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry wasp. They'd even disabled my email access, leaving only basic spreadsheet functions. I took photos of everything, then texted Clara. They've put me in the basement with no email access. Her response, beautiful. Keep documenting. Every action they take adds zeros to the settlement. But Virexon's retaliation extended beyond the building. By noon, I started receiving texts from colleagues. Grant sent a company-wide memo. Says you're under investigation for corporate espionage. Legal just told us anyone caught speaking to you will be terminated. They're searching everyone's computers for communications with you. Then came the personal attacks. My LinkedIn was flooded with connection requests from fake profiles, all posting defamatory comments. Someone had found my address and signed me up for hundreds of spam mailing lists. My personal phone rang constantly with robocalls. At 2 p.m., something interesting happened. 3 employees risked their careers to visit the basement. First was Diana Foster, the woman I'd seen destroyed in Grant's emails. She slipped in during lunch break, looking over her shoulder. I heard what happened, she whispered. What he did to you. He did worse to me. I've been documenting everything for 2 years, hoping someone would listen. She handed me a USB drive. Everything's on there, recordings, emails, even a video from the Christmas party when he cornered me in the supply room. I installed a spy cam app on my phone after the first incident. Next came Marcus Thompson from engineering, the one Grant had targeted for questioning numbers. They made me sign a final warning for performance issues after I supported your data in a meeting last year, he said. But I kept all the original reports showing my performance was exemplary until I crossed Grant. It's all here. Another USB drive. The third visitor surprised me. Patricia Hoffman from legal. I can't stay long, she said, her usual composure cracking. But you need to know, they're shredding documents upstairs, physical files. Grant ordered it an hour ago. It's illegal. But they're panicking. Why are you telling me this? She looked at the floor. Because I have a daughter. She's 24, just starting her career. When Grant hit you yesterday, all I could think was, what if that was her? And I sat there. I did nothing. Her voice broke. I've been complicit in this system for 5 years. I can't anymore. Will you testify? I need to think. But I've preserved copies of everything they're trying to destroy. My assistant has been scanning files all morning on my orders. If subpoenaed, I'll have to produce them. After they left, I called Clara with the updates. She was ecstatic. They're destroying evidence. That's obstruction of justice. Patricia preserving copies means we'll have proof of what they tried to hide. This is Christmas morning for prosecutors. At 4 p.m., my personal phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was Grant. You stupid little bitch. His voice was slurred. Afternoon drinking. You think you've won? I own this city. I golf with judges. My father-in-law is Senator Morrison. You're nothing. A nobody. By the time I'm done, you'll be unemployable in any state. Grant, I said calmly, hitting record on my second phone. Are you threatening me? It's not a threat, sweetheart. It's a promise. Drop this investigation, or I'll destroy more than your career. I know where you live. I know you jog in Cheeseman Park every morning. Accidents happen. Is that a physical threat, Grant? Take it however you want, but remember, little girls who play with fire get burned. He hung up. I immediately sent the recording to Clara and Marcus. Within an hour, federal marshals were at my apartment, and a restraining order was expedited through emergency channels. That evening, local news picked up the story. Virexon executive under federal investigation for assault ran on Channel 9. My phone exploded with messages from former Virexon employees, journalists, and even competitors sharing similar stories about Grant. But the best message came from Lucas Varnes at 11 p.m. Meet me at Dasbog Coffee on 16th Street tomorrow at 7 a.m. Bring Clara. I have everything. 3 years of deleted files, hidden recordings, even Grant's personal laptop backup. He's finished. As I lay in bed that night, my face throbbing, my career at Virexon certainly over. I felt something I hadn't experienced in 18 months. Peace. Grant thought he was punishing me with that basement office, the isolation, the threats. He didn't understand that every action he took was another nail in his coffin. Tomorrow, Lucas would deliver the killing blow. The basement had become my war room, and Grant's desperation had given us obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and criminal threats to add to the charges. He'd tried to bury me in that basement. Instead, he'd simply given me a quiet place to document his empire's collapse. The story broke on Thursday morning like a thunderclap across Denver's business community. Virexon executive accused of assault. Federal investigation expands, screamed the headline of the Denver Post. But it was the Westwatch Journal's investigative piece that truly shook the foundations. A pattern of abuse inside Virexon's culture of fear. I sat in Clara's office, watching the news coverage explode across multiple screens. The journalist, Sandra Mitchell, had done her homework. She'd found 7 former employees willing to speak on record, their silhouettes and altered voices telling eerily similar stories of Grant's reign of terror. This goes deeper than one executive, Sandra was saying on Channel 9's morning show. We're looking at systematic corporate abuse enabled by HR, legal, and senior management. Our sources indicate federal investigators are treating this as a potential RICO case. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Former colleagues, some I'd never even spoken to, were reaching out with their own stories. But the most significant message came from an unexpected source, Senator Morrison's office. "Miss Bright," the voicemail said. "This is Chief of Staff Williams from Senator Morrison's office. The senator would like to make clear that he has no involvement with his son-in-law's business affairs and supports all federal investigations. He will be making a statement this afternoon." Grant's political protection was evaporating. By noon, the social media storm had reached Category 5. Virexon assault was trending nationally. Someone had leaked a photo of my bruised face from the federal documentation, and it had gone viral. Women's rights organizations were calling for boycotts. Investors were fleeing. Then came the corporate casualties. At 2 p.m., Virexon's board called an emergency meeting. By 3 p.m., the CEO issued a statement. Effective immediately, Grant Sawyer has been suspended without pay pending investigation. Virexon takes all allegations seriously and is cooperating fully with federal authorities. But the real bombshell came from Lucas Varnes. We'd met him that morning as planned, in a corner booth at Dasbog Coffee. He'd brought 2 laptops and a box of external drives that looked like digital dynamite. "After you left yesterday, they went into full panic mode," Lucas explained, his hands shaking slightly as he opened the first laptop. "Grant ordered me to wipe the servers, destroy all backups from the last 3 years, offered me $50,000 in cash." "Did you take it?" Clara asked. "I took the money," Lucas said, then smiled. "And used it to buy more backup drives. I've preserved everything. 3 years of data they thought was gone forever." What Lucas showed us defied belief. Grant hadn't just committed fraud, he'd built an entire shadow operation, secret accounts siphoning money from client funds, bribes to city officials for favorable energy contracts, even a scheme to short-sell Virexon stock based on insider information. This email thread, Lucas pointed to his screen, shows Grant coordinating with 2 other VPs to manipulate earnings reports before public announcements. They made millions while retail investors lost everything. Clara immediately called Marcus Webb at the DOJ. Within hours, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division was involved. The SEC launched a formal investigation. The Colorado Attorney General's office opened their own probe. That evening, as I watched the news from my apartment, Virexon's stock price had dropped 40%. 3 major clients had suspended their contracts. The company's market value had evaporated by nearly $1 billion in a single day. But the human stories were what really mattered. Jennifer Wu went on record with CNN, breaking her NDA publicly. "These agreements aren't about protecting trade secrets. They're about protecting predators. I'm done being silent." Her courage inspired others. By nightfall, 12 women had come forward with similar stories. The NDAs were crumbling like wet paper, each woman deciding that truth was worth more than hush money. Margaret from HR tried to do damage control, appearing on a local podcast to claim ignorance. But someone leaked emails showing her explicitly strategizing with Grant on how to silence victims. She was suspended by Friday morning. Patricia Hoffman from Legal, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall, held a press conference. "I deeply regret my role in enabling this toxic culture," she said, looking genuinely broken. "I will be cooperating fully with investigators and have provided authorities with extensive documentation of systemic violations at Virexon." The most satisfying moment came when Channel 9 obtained security footage from the lobby. Someone, I suspect Tom, the security guard, had leaked video of Grant being escorted out by federal agents that afternoon. His Armani suit replaced with handcuffs. His face, purple with rage and humiliation, became the thumbnail for every article about corporate abuse of power. My phone rang. It was my old boss, Marcus Webb. "Amelia, I just got off the phone with the Attorney General. Based on the evidence you and Clara have provided, they're convening a grand jury. This isn't just about Grant anymore. The entire executive structure of Virexon is under investigation. How bad is it for them? Remember Enron. This could be worse. The financial fraud alone could result in decades of prison time. Add in the assault, harassment, bribery, and insider trading, Grant Sawyer won't see freedom for a very long time. That night, as Denver's skyline glittered outside my window, I opened a bottle of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving. My face still hurt. My career at Virexon was over, and I'd probably spend months in courtrooms testifying. But across the city, Grant Sawyer was sitting in a federal holding cell, his empire in ruins, his reputation destroyed, his future reduced to a number in the federal prison system. All because he couldn't control his temper for 1 second. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window, bruised, battered, but unbroken. One slap, I said to myself, one slap, and you gave us everything we needed to destroy you. Tomorrow, the grand jury would convene. The real reckoning was just beginning. The killing blow came from Lucas Varney's final revelation. We were in the federal prosecutor's office, a sterile room with fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty. Marcus Webb was there, along with 2 FBI agents and an SEC investigator. Lucas sat at the center, his laptop connected to a large monitor, about to unveil what he'd cryptically referred to as Grant's insurance policy. 3 years ago, Lucas began, his voice steady now that he was under federal protection. Grant hired me to create a private server, completely off Virexon's grid. He said it was for sensitive strategic planning. What it really was a conspiracy hub. He pulled up a folder structure that made everyone in the room lean forward. This is Grant's personal archive. Every illegal deal, every bribe, every threat, he documented it all. But here's the thing, he wasn't alone. He was protecting himself by implicating others. The first file he opened was labeled Revenue Manipulation Scheme. It contained detailed spreadsheets showing how Grant, along with CFO Richard Blackwood and COO Jennifer Sterling, had systematically inflated revenues by creating shell companies that would purchase Virexon services, then dissolve before payment was due. $200 million in fake revenue over 3 years. The SEC investigator whispered, "This is securities fraud on a massive scale." It gets worse, Lucas continued, opening another folder. Political contributions. The documents showed illegal campaign contributions funneled through employee bonuses, which were then donated back to specific candidates. Grant had been buying political protection, using company funds laundered through his subordinates' paychecks. This one, Lucas said, clicking on a file labeled Competitor Sabotage, shows how Grant hired private investigators to dig up dirt on rival companies' executives. When he couldn't find dirt, he manufactured it. There were forged documents, fabricated photographs, even a plan to plant cocaine in a competitor's car. The FBI agents were taking rapid notes, occasionally exchanging glances that said this case had just expanded far beyond Virexon. But the most damaging revelation was hidden in a folder simply labeled Insurance. Grant secretly recorded every conversation with other executives. Lucas explained. He was building protection in case anyone turned on him. The recordings were devastating. Richard Blackwood discussing how to hide losses from auditors. Jennifer Sterling proposing they bribe a federal regulator. Board members joking about investor money being their personal ATM. Even Margaret from HR, planning how to threaten employees into silence. Play recording 47. Marcus Webb instructed. Lucas clicked, and Grant's voice filled the room. Talking to someone identified as board chairman William Cross. If the real numbers ever come out, we're all going to prison. But they won't, because we're all in this together, mutually assured destruction. Billy? Nobody talks, everybody walks. The room was silent for a moment before the FBI agent spoke. This isn't just corporate fraud anymore, this is organized crime. The entire leadership structure was in on it. Marcus Webb stood up. Mr. Varney's, are you willing to testify to all of this before a grand jury? Yes, but I want full immunity and witness protection. Done. That afternoon, the U.S. Attorney for Colorado held a press conference. What started as an assault investigation had uncovered one of the largest corporate fraud schemes in Colorado history. 17 executives were being indicted. The FBI was raiding homes across Denver. I watched from Clara's office as the news broke. Every channel showed the same scenes. FBI agents carrying boxes from Virexon headquarters, executives being led away in handcuffs, employees streaming out of the building as it was sealed for investigation. My phone rang. It was Grant Sawyer, calling from federal detention. "You fucking bitch," he snarled. "You destroyed everything. Do you understand what you've done? You destroyed yourself. Grant, I just made sure everyone saw it. This isn't over. I have resources you can't imagine. When I get out—" "You're not getting out," I interrupted. "Lucas gave them everything. Your secret recordings, your fraud schemes, your bribes. You documented your own crimes. Grant, you built a meticulous record of 20 years of felonies." Silence on the other end. "The best part?" I continued. "You thought you were so smart, recording everyone else to protect yourself. But all you did was create evidence that will put you and 17 others away for decades. I'll make a deal. I'll testify against the others. With what leverage? Lucas already gave them everything. You have nothing to trade." More silence, then a broken whisper. "This was all about that slap?" "No. Grant, the slap was just your final mistake. This was about every woman you harassed, every employee you destroyed, every investor you defrauded. This was 18 months of preparation for the moment you finally went too far. 18 months? You've been planning this for... since the day I walked into Virexon. You see, Grant, your reputation preceded you. I came there specifically to take you down. The slap just made it easier." I hung up. It was the last time Grant Sawyer and I would ever speak. The next day, forensic accountants announced the real extent of the fraud: $1.2 billion in fabricated revenue. The SEC froze all executive assets. Virexon's stock was delisted. The company that had once been worth $4 billion was heading for bankruptcy. But in that federal database of evidence, tagged as Exhibit 1 in case number 2024, CR 1847, was a single piece of security footage. Timestamp: 10:47 a.m. Duration: 3 seconds. A man in an Armani suit striking a woman across the face while 11 people watched in silence. One moment of violence that brought down an empire. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver had never seen media coverage like this. Every major news outlet in the country had sent reporters. The steps were packed with cameras, all waiting for the moment that would define corporate accountability for a generation. I sat in the witness box, my hand on the Bible, staring directly at Grant Sawyer. He'd lost 40 pounds in federal detention, his designer suits replaced with a gray defendant's uniform. But his eyes still held that familiar rage, now mixed with something else: fear. "Miss Bright," the prosecutor began, "please describe for the jury what happened on the morning of October 15th. I spoke clearly, letting every word ring through the silent courtroom. The security footage played on screens around the room, that 3-second clip that had been viewed 50 million times online. The crack of the slap echoed through the speakers, and several jurors visibly flinched. But the slap was just the opening. Over 6 hours of testimony, I laid out everything: the systematic fraud, the harassment, the threats, the conspiracy. Every document I'd collected, every recording I'd made, every piece of evidence from those 18 months of preparation. Grant's defense attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee, a corporate spy, a woman scorned. But the evidence was overwhelming. When he asked why I'd taken the job knowing Grant's reputation, I looked him straight in the eye. Because someone had to stop him, and I knew I could. The other witnesses were devastating. Jennifer Wu broke down describing Grant's sexual assault. Lucas Varnes methodically explained the financial fraud. Even Patricia Hoffman, granted partial immunity, testified about the systematic cover-ups she'd participated in. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the count of assault in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, guilty. The verdicts kept coming. 27 counts. 27 times the word guilty rang through the courtroom. Grant's face went from red to white to gray. At sentencing 2 months later, Judge Harrison didn't mince words. Mr. Sawyer, you represent the worst of corporate America. You built an empire on fear, fraud, and intimidation. You believed your wealth and position placed you above the law. You were wrong. She paused, looking at the victim impact statements. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution of $3.5 million to your victims and forfeit all assets obtained through criminal enterprise. 12 years. Grant collapsed into his chair. His elderly father left the courtroom in tears. Senator Morrison, his father-in-law, had already publicly disowned him. Virexon Holdings was liquidated in bankruptcy. The other executives received sentences ranging from 2 to 8 years. Margaret from HR got 18 months. The company that had once employed 3,000 people simply ceased to exist. As I walked out of the courthouse for the last time, reporters surrounded me. Miss Bright, what's next for you? Was it worth it? Any regrets? I stopped at the microphone cluster, looking directly into the cameras. To everyone out there who's being abused, harassed, or intimidated at work, document everything. Find allies. Don't let them silence you. Sometimes it takes 18 months of patience, but justice is possible. What would you say to Grant Sawyer? I smiled. I'd thank him for the slap. Without it, he might have gotten away with everything. Claire and I now run a consulting firm helping whistleblowers build cases against corporate predators. Marcus Webb nominated me for a federal commendation for service to justice. The women who came forward formed a support network that's helped dozens of others find their voices. But the image that stays with me isn't from the courtroom or the media coverage. It's from a security camera. 3 months after the verdict. Grant Sawyer. Federal inmate number 478320013. Mopping floors in a prison cafeteria. The man who once commanded a billion-dollar empire, who terrorized employees with impunity, who thought one slap would put me in my place, reduced to cleaning up other people's messes. I told him the truth in that phone call. The slap wasn't what destroyed him. The slap was just the trigger. What destroyed Grant Sawyer was 18 months of methodical preparation, waiting for the moment his arrogance would override his caution. 1 slap, 3 seconds of violence, 11 silent witnesses, and an empire reduced to rubble. As I stand in my new office, looking out at the Denver skyline, where Virexon's tower once dominated, I touch my cheek. The bruise faded long ago, but the memory remains, not of pain, but of the moment I knew we'd won. Grant Sawyer thought he was untouchable. He thought wrong. And somewhere in federal prison, every time he closes his eyes, I bet he still hears the sound of that slap, the 3-second mistake that cost him everything. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it comes prepared, it comes completely. The monster thought I was prey. He never realized he was walking into a trap 18 months in the making. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and courage. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what country or city you're tuning in from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. And share your thoughts about Amelia's journey in the comments. What would you have done in her situation? Let's discuss.